Follow the money. Capital moves before headlines. Capital leaves first because it can. Before the moving trucks, there's a wire transfer. A Zurich banker told me their inbox filled months before any press noticed. Family offices didn't make speeches, they changed domiciles. They opened accounts in time zones that answered on first ring, shifted trustees, and moved holding companies to treaty-friendly jurisdictions. A Miami patriarch with Chicago roots flew to Dubai for a weekend and left with a free zone license, a private office lease, and a residency track for 3 generations. Back home, his museum gala donation went pending and never cleared. The dates didn't make headlines, the ACH instructions did. The signals weren't loud, they were patterned. Private bankers watched client mail go from New York to Singapore forwarding addresses. Wealth managers in London got asked, twice in 1 week, about carried interest treatment in the Gulf. An Italian fund of funds spliced its vehicles. LP commitments stayed in euros, but the GP entity redomiciled where the tax ruling fit on 1 page. When the lawyers start using the phrase certainty letter, you know what's coming. Venture capital followed in a quieter formation. An AI seed fund with a San Francisco logo started wiring to cap tables that listed Dubai, Singapore, and Bangalore as home bases. Their LPs, some Middle Eastern, some Asian, preferred fund jurisdictions near their courts. The general partners resisted, then compromised. Keep the Delaware flagship, launch a feeder in a new hub, hold the next close there. The partners didn't tweet it. They emailed LP updates with new routing instructions. Then came the domiciles. Fund administrators set up shells that weren't shells at all, operational offices with compliance staff, not just brass plaques. Because once an LP side letter mentions local substance, you build substance. A New York growth fund hired a Zurich controller and a Lisbon ops lead. Payroll moved with them. A quarter later, the fund bragged about global footprint on stage. The truth was simpler. The compliance tail had wagged the enterprise dog. Real estate made it visible on both ends. Trophy apartments in Western cores came to market under LLCs that wanted discretion. Prices cut quietly. In parallel, beachhead assets in Dubai, Lisbon, and Singapore got snapped up, often not as homes, but as anchors for resident status. A family selling a Pacific Heights townhouse bought 3 properties abroad, 1 for the parents, 1 for the adult children, 1 for an office apartment near a free zone. Their art stayed in climate control, their capital didn't. The liquidation wasn't panic, it was rotation. A Boston landlord who once financed on cap rate logic couldn't ignore changing risk premiums. Office floors that used to pay for pensions now sat dark. Bond markets had already priced the risk, tax receipts lagged. He sold 2 downtown assets and bought logistics space near a Gulf airport with night flight slots. The rent checks arrived like clockwork. His contribution to the local arts council stopped arriving at all. Payroll migration flew under the radar. Employer of record platforms extended footprints into the same destination hubs that offered clear rules. A Lowe's Angels studio didn't move its brand. It moved 50 contractors onto a compliant payroll abroad, then turned contractors into employees to unlock visas. The team kept the same Slack channels and shipped from a different legal entity. The city logged fewer commuter rides and wondered why sales tax was soft. The answer was on a cap table in another time zone. Banking told the same story. Relationship managers noticed clients asking about FX hedging tied to currencies they hadn't touched before. A biotech CEO set up a multi-currency treasury sweep. Revenue from Europe cleared to Zurich, vendor payments routed from Singapore, executive comp paid locally in a low-tax hub. The spreadsheet wasn't aggressive, it was defensive. Double tax agreements meant fewer surprises. The CFO slept better. Tax treaty optimization turned into a playbook. One family office mapped out a triangle: hold IP in a jurisdiction with strong treaty networks, operate in a hub with clear corporate rules, and realize gains where capital treatment was predictable. Their lawyers ran mock exits with differing sequences. The gap between good enough and treaty optimized paid for the move 10 times over. They didn't brag about it at dinners. They sent their kids to schools near the new HQ and called the old city every few months to say hi. Meanwhile, private banking desks hosted breakfasts in hotels abroad. The pitch wasn't move your life, it was move your entity first. A Houston entrepreneur who swore he'd never leave set up a holding company in a zero-tax hub just for future deals. 6 months later, his next acquisition closed under that entity. 12 months after that, he, his COO, and the head of tax were on a first-name basis with the head of the free zone. Bodies follow balance sheets. Currency decisions hinted at deeper bets. A hedge fund that once only thought in dollars and euros added dirham and Singapore dollar exposure, not for returns but for operating stability. They built baskets that mirrored payroll geography. They weren't speculating, they were matching cash flows to realities. When someone asked why, the PM shrugged. We go where the regulators pick up the phone. Capital migration created job migration, one vendor update at a time. A New York software firm moved its billing to a jurisdiction with clear VAT refunds. The accountants followed. A Midwest hardware company shifted procurement to a free zone with same-day customs clearance. The logistics team followed. Headlines asked if a city's soul was leaving. The accounts payable system had answered months earlier. Here's the uncomfortable part. By the time an op-ed laments decline, the money already left. It left inside letters, in trust deeds, in bank routing templates, in HRIS country codes. It left in the way boards asked, "What's our exposure to that jurisdiction?" before they asked about the product roadmap. And once the capital moved, industries began to tilt. Now watch who goes next. Industry by industry, who's leaving fastest? While capital quietly rewired the map, industries started moving in visible waves. Not all at once. One sector found the door, then another noticed it stayed open. Speed and certainty picked the order. Tech founders and AI labs went first because compute doesn't wait. A Bay Area team priced cloud credits against a sovereign compute partnership abroad and realized the monthly burn halved once tax, rent, and headcount rules shifted. But here's the real lever: equity taxation. One lab's senior engineer walked because option treatment at home turned murky after a policy tweak. Abroad, a ruling laid out vesting, exercise, and exit in 4 sentences. Their CTO followed compute, not slogans. In a sandboxed regime with provisional licenses, they shipped a model update 6 weeks earlier than their rival. Investors noticed the cadence and started visiting, then wiring. A rival stayed put and found that recruiting into an 18-month permit cycle felt like trying to sprint in sand. Biotech wasn't far behind. R&D hates uncertainty even more than software does. A Boston principal investigator lost a quarter waiting for a local IRB re-review triggered by a procedural change. Across the ocean, an accelerated approval sandbox cleared a first-in-human protocol in under 2 months, with pre-scheduled inspection windows that actually happened. Lab fit-out there came with a checklist and a date. The centrifuges spun on schedule. A postdoc who once assumed science meant Boston or San Diego toured a cluster in Singapore and saw something simple: regulators who talked to scientists like partners. A Swiss lab offered her housing within walking distance and a school that could handle bilingual progression. She signed the contract the day the grant arrived because the timelines aligned. Meanwhile, her old lab wrote a bridge request to cover idle equipment time. Crypto and fintech moved where licensing clarity met bank accounts that opened. In London, a founder endured 3 banks declining a compliant entity without explanation. In Dubai, the regulator asked for a stack of documents on Monday and issued a preliminary license on Friday. The bank manager showed up at the office with a card printer. Compliance didn't relax, it got legible. A payment startup that spent 9 months chasing e-money authorization at home found an equivalent category abroad in a fraction of the time and began onboarding merchants immediately. The board didn't debate philosophy. They measured chargeback rates and settlement times, and they followed the faster rails. Media and the creator economy pivoted through tax treatment and IP holding structures. A producer with spiky earnings and international distribution built an IP holdco in a jurisdiction designed for royalty flows. Instead of arguing annually over source-based withholding with 3 tax authorities, she rooted through a treaty network that settled disputes on paper, once. A YouTube production house shifted its edit suite to a free zone with visa lanes for freelancers. Their editors stopped juggling expired permits and started cutting. Ad splits didn't change, friction costs disappeared. When a platform offered an advance to lock and exclusivity, the company routed the deal through the new entity, and the cash showed up without an extra audit loop. The creative leads called it breathing room. Healthcare professionals moved because visas finally treated them like the scarce resource they are. A pediatric anesthesiologist sick of unpredictable schedules and rising malpractice premiums took a pathway that recognized her credentials in weeks, not years. Pay wasn't just higher. Malpractice risk was bounded by a published schedule. Hospitals bundled housing and school placement because they understood the bottleneck wasn't salary, it was family stability. A nurse manager who'd floated between units in Chicago landed in a hospital where staffing ratios were enforced by software and supervisors backed the numbers. She called home after the first week and talked about the shock of finishing a shift on time. Manufacturing leadership and hardware engineers surprised themselves by going, too. Precision tooling firms looked at customs delays and insurance on domestic freight, and then toured a free zone with same-day clearance, bonded storage, and midnight cargo slots. A plant manager who'd memorized the 30-step dance for importing a single part watched a streamlined process that required 3. He moved a pilot line to test the math, and then moved himself because the pilot hit yield targets a quarter early. Vendors followed the purchase orders. Academia and research began an awkward shuffle. A mid-career physicist hearing about grant uncertainty applied abroad as a test and got a lab package with tenure-track terms, guaranteed compute, and a relocation stipend that actually covered relocation. He hated leaving students. He also couldn't map a 5-year plan at home. When a new administration sent combative signals toward top universities, a cohort that once thought of itself as rooted sent CVs. Some didn't leave the West. They went to Zurich or Singapore. Others took Gulf research chairs because the equipment lists were greenlit in a week. The labs filled, the preprints carried new institutional addresses. Legal and finance talent chased deal flow and certainty. Fund counsel who built practices around Delaware and London learned treaty webs and stayed billable. Controllers who could operate multi-entity structures across 3 currencies found themselves courted. Payroll leads who could run employer of record transitions became headhunters, favorite calls. It sounds dry, but these are the people who turn a relocation from an idea into a functioning company in 6 weeks. They're going where their playbooks match the rules. Across each sector, the pattern repeats. Licensing clarity plus visa speed plus predictable tax equals earlier revenue. Earlier revenue funds better teams ship faster, and speed compounds. The ones leaving fastest aren't chasing novelty. They're following the shortest path from plan to product. Speed wins, time to S versus death by process. Here, S where the gap turns into a chasm, time. In one city, approvals arrive like a train schedule. In another, they meander like a lost package. The difference isn't philosophy, it's throughput. And throughput decides who ships, hires, and survives. Start with a lab that needed 3 things: a wet room permit, a hazardous material clearance, and a clinic partnership sign-off. Abroad, they uploaded documents on Monday, got a joint inspection Friday, and a green light the following Wednesday. 11 days end-to-end. The same lab sister team tried at home. 18 months later, they were still reconciling contradictory notes from 3 agencies that didn't talk. Payroll never pauses. Burn is a metronome. 11 days versus 18 months becomes existential. While that was happening in New York, a founder in Austin thought he'd picked the fast option. He hadn't. The city's single department sign-off hit a parade of sub-approvals. Fire, zoning, health, signage, wastewater, each with its own portal and password reset purgatory. He lost a product cycle and a hire who couldn't wait. Unknown to him across town, a multinational got a concierge liaison who smoothed the same path in weeks. The message landed: speed exists, but not for everyone. Single-window agencies aren't slogans when they work. In Singapore, a regulator called the founder directly to ask one clarifying question, logged the answer, and moved the file. In Dubai, a case officer pinged a WhatsApp group with a timeline and hit it. In Zurich, the clerk emailed as soon as the missing form arrived. No weekly batch, no bureaucratic delay, just the next step now. The founder's calendar filled with product reviews not permit babysitting. He felt that in his bones. Death by process hides in the spaces between departments. A biotech fit-out failed an inspection on a duct that met the published spec because the inspector used a newer spec that wasn't online yet. Appeal took 6 weeks. The landlord ate the delay, the startup ate the payroll. Meanwhile, the rival abroad received a pre-inspection checklist with exact references and an engineer's number. They passed the first time. Weeks saved aren't just weeks. They're runway, hiring, and investor confidence. Public-private concierge models turned government into a team sport. In Riyadh, the media entrepreneur wasn't guessing. A liaison walked him across agencies like a guide with keys, collecting signatures in a day. A KPI dashboard showed average times, not averages that lie, real medians with outliers flagged. When a step slipped, someone owned the slip and fixed it. He closed his first contract before his old city would have confirmed his appointment. Compute access can be a speed function, too. An AI lab waiting for a domestic grant to unlock GPU credits watched a sovereign partner abroad offer immediate capacity tied to milestones. Credits live today beat credits promised tomorrow. They shipped a demo on week 4. Their competitors scheduled a meeting. The compounding effect turns a single fast decision into a cascade. Approvals in weeks mean a product ships this quarter. Revenue this quarter funds 2 senior hires. Those hires unblock the next feature. That feature closes the enterprise pilot sitting in limbo. Cash arrives early, reducing dilution. The board breathes. Repeat that loop 3 times and you're a category leader instead of a cautionary tale. Here's a micro story. A robotics startup needed a sidewalk permit to test delivery bots. In one Western city, the application triggered public comment and 3 separate hearings. Delays turned into a seasonal miss. No holiday pilot, no viral footage, no buyer urgency. Abroad, a predefined sandbox corridor existed. The company signed a compliance sheet, ran telemetry to a shared dashboard, and rolled within 30 days. When a sensor faulted, the regulator saw it in real time and texted the engineer a photo. Partners loved the posture, firm rules, fast feedback. What nobody knew at the time, the fast hubs measure refusal speed too. If the answer is no, they say no quickly with reasons. Teams pivot. The costliest outcome in slow cities isn't a no, it's a maybe stretched over quarters. That uncertainty bleeds morale, burns capital, and kills prototypes off camera. There's a cultural piece, escalation. In legible systems, escalation isn't a threat, it's a tool. The founder pings an escalation desk, uploads the thread, and a senior official replies with a decision window. In legacy systems, escalation means CCing another address and hoping. Hope isn't governance. A team cannot plan on hope. While that was happening, bond markets priced the cost of slow. Cities with process sprawl bled commercial activity, vacancies rose, revenue fell. The agencies inside them fell further behind, causing more delay. Meanwhile, the hubs that honored time kept outgrowing their capacity and still hit their service levels. It wasn't magic. It was queuing theory resourced. The lesson hit founders first, then everyone else. Speed isn't a perk. It's infrastructure. If your city can't deliver a predictable yes or a fast no, it's taxing your scarcest resource without passing a law. Teams will leave to buy back their hours. And the places that sell time reliably will keep winning. One approval, one shipment, one hire, one quarter at a time. The municipal math, when revenues fall apart. Speed is infrastructure, and when it slips, the math shows up in ledgers. You feel it first in empty floors. Office vacancies don't just darken windows. They punch holes in property tax rolls that cities quietly rely on. In San Francisco, by late 2024, downtown office vacancy hovered in the mid to high 30% range, approximately 36–38%, a series peak. That isn't a statistic. That's a missing check to the general fund, and every missing check forces choices. Property tax is the quiet backbone. When an office tower's assessed value gets appealed down because leases vanish, the city loses twice, less tax now and lower comps for the next appeal. Landlords negotiate reductions with spreadsheets that prove the market has moved. Finance directors watch projections drift from black to gray. Meanwhile, retail that fed on office workers thins out. Sales tax softens as the lunch crowd turns into leftovers at home. Transit feels the hit next. Farebox recovery was always tight. Hybrid work turned tight into an air gap. Fewer riders, fewer fares, and a fixed rail schedule designed for a world that doesn't commute 5 days anymore. The gap has to be filled by the same general fund that just lost property tax. Push here, it bulges there. Maintenance gets deferred, then breaks on a Tuesday morning rush. Pensions sit like granite in the middle of the table. You can't cut them with a press conference. They're promises backed by law, compounded by lifespans, and linked to investment returns you don't control. Chicago's numbers are a postcard from the edge. On the order of the mid-$50 billions in unfunded city pension liabilities as of 2023–2024, with additional teacher and retiree health obligations layered on top. Credit agencies read the same tables and tighten the screws. Borrowing costs rise while revenues fall. That spread is the sound of services being squeezed. Elastic costs flex, inelastic ones don't. Parks can trim hours, police and fire rotations can't. Trash pickup shifts a day, debt service doesn't. Cities cut where they can, weekend library hours fade, pool seasons shrink, rec centers close early. Residents don't read the budget, they feel the missing lifeguard and the darkened stacks. The feedback loop sets in. Slightly worse services push a few more families out. Fewer taxpayers push the budget tighter. The next cut lands closer to bone. Bond markets don't do sentiment. They price risk. When multiple large cities took downgrades in the same season, it wasn't a vendetta. It was a model picking up weaker revenues against heavier fixed costs. Higher yields attract buyers, sure, but they extract their price. Every new issuance costs more. Refinancing windows become cliff edges. A miss triggers a scramble. Finance committees start every meeting with a debt calendar like a pilot scanning instruments. Meanwhile, downtown's hollow and conversion dreams hit zoning realities. Those empty offices, converting them into apartments sounds clean on a panel. In practice, plates are too deep, windows too narrow, plumbing cores wrong, seismic codes unforgiving. The cap stack doesn't pencil without subsidies that don't exist because, see above, the general fund is wheezing. A few clever projects happen, the rest wait for a program that never launches. Transit agencies keep swinging. They beg for temporary backfills from the state or federal pots that ballooned during COVID and are now tapering. Temporary becomes structural when ridership never fully returns. You can cut frequency to save money, but you also cut the reason riders come back. A spiral isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's a quiet ratchet, one headway at a time. There's a line in budget meetings that stings. We're solvent on paper. It means accrual tricks and timing shifts keep the legal requirement intact while real costs are pushed forward. 54 of the 75 largest U.S. cities recently faced that math, reported in 2023-2024 assessments. Not enough assets to cover long-term bills. The short-term fix is fees, parking, permits, penalties. But fees behave like taxes for the people who pay them. And the people who pay them happen to be the ones who can still leave. Open loop moment. One U.S. city sits closer to the edge than the rest. You can see it in the trifecta: vacancies high, pension loads heavy, debt service rising. The name is coming, not to doom it, but to show what the cliff looks like from the guardrail. Before collapse, neighborhoods feel the math first. A school closure saves budget lines but tears roots through morning routines. A bus line cut saves fuel but isolates a clinic from its patients. A grant that used to fund a youth program sunsets. The nonprofit director calls donors who already changed zip codes. The city announces a pilot to fix something basic: permits, safety, housing. But the pilot requires an application that takes a Saturday to complete. People with options don't apply. People without options wait. Credit downgrades filter down to contractors who tack on risk premiums. A small construction firm says yes, but adds weeks and dollars to cover city pay cycles that slowed. Housing projects that might have added supply stall because capital got nervous. The dashboard says pipeline. The crane count says pause. Here's the part that's hardest to say out loud. Service cuts don't just reflect revenue loss, they accelerate it. A family leaves when the second school closes, not the first. A business moves after the third burglary, not the second. The line is personal, not statistical, but when enough people hit it at once, the budget becomes a mirror. Cities can reverse spirals. Some will. But right now, in too many cores, the math is doing what math does, balancing. And that balancing shows up as fewer hours, fewer routes, fewer open windows at the permit counter, and more letters from bond desks using words like Outlook negative. Before the accountants finish their slides, neighborhoods will write the story for them. Neighborhood aftershocks, the human map. Before the accountants finish their slides, neighborhoods start keeping score. You hear it in the echo of an empty school auditorium. On a Tuesday in Oakland, parents line up to read a notice taped to the door: consolidation. The principal's voice carries across folding chairs. Buses will reroute, sibling placements may change, counseling will transition. A mother who walks 2 jobs does the math on a longer commute for her son. Her margin disappears. The PTA treasurer stares at a spreadsheet with a hole where a marquee donor used to be.